I'm Mary Cirincione, VP of US for Propeller, and I'm pleased to kick off Comms Club with a panel around purpose and profit. Namely, can you prioritize both and communicate that prioritization with a sense of intentionality? Joining me today are Anna Lungley, Chief Sustainability Officer at Dentsu and based in London, and Julian McBride, Global Media Relations and Communications at Accenture Interactive and based in Brooklyn. So to begin, let's shift back to early January, when headlines everywhere zeroed in on the comments of a leading fund manager who claimed that global brand and powerhouse, Unilever, had lost the plot by trying too hard to appeal to sustainability and purpose-fueled themes instead of focusing on the business itself and ultimately its profitability. So let's start with Anna. When you caught these headlines, what were your initial thoughts as someone who lives and breathes the sustainability space?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for having me. Honestly, huge disappointment. I mean, from my perspective, Unilever is a brand that has championed this agenda for over a decade, and they've really addressed the hard issues in their business, their supply chain, and their product strategy. And they've repeatedly demonstrated to investors and to all of their shareholders that profit and purpose can coexist, with their portfolio growing 69% faster than the rest of the business. And Alan Jope was very, very active at COP26 in Glasgow. I was with him there, really talking about this agenda. So within this context, it felt that Terry Smith's comments were not justified and perhaps out of touch with what consumers want today. Because we know, and at Dentsu, we're one of the world's largest media and advertising companies. We work with billions of consumers all over the world, and what we know is people are no longer passive consumers. They are activists. They're motivated by causes and values in a very profound way, and the way that a brand behaves and what it stands for will influence its brand, its reputation, the talent it attracts, which is really important and more than ever today, and of course, the product it sells. And when I say they're activists, our data says that 2/3 of consumers will actually they'll actually choose, switch, or boycott a brand based on its stand on societal issues. Millennials will actually pick up the phone and call a brand if they don't agree with their stance on purpose. So it did feel that those comments were quite disconnected with the world we live in today.
I love how you said that disconnected piece. Oh, Julian, over to you.
I was just going to say the values that people expect from companies today has completely changed. So yes, absolutely, companies need to embrace that communicating purpose and profit can be possible. It is possible. It's a reality. Many things can coexist at the same time. And, we just, as companies and communicators, we need to help our brands and businesses understand the values that have shifted and what people are expecting from companies today. I mean, how is a company keeping my community healthy and safe? How is my community personalizing their communication to me and my needs? How is a company meeting me where I am? Whether that's present digitally or physically, and let's understand, help us understand the origins of your products and services. Where are the resources coming from? And more importantly, trust and reputation are what we expect from companies, right? Can I trust you to do the right thing? Can I trust you to be a corporate, a responsible company in all senses? So I think, that commentary, in my perspective, wasn't totally reading the room and kind of these shifting consumer values that we all as communicators need to help our clients navigate.
Absolutely. And I think, so what you've both told me is that purpose and profit can coexist, right? So we've kind of made that initial case there. But I think there's this broader question in what you were talking to, Julian, was this idea of needing to recognize what is shifting in terms of communication consumer sentiments and feelings, right? And then because of that, there's a need to shift that communication. So that brings me to this question of, can you own a stance, right, which prioritizes purpose and communicate that to both employees and customers, right? So how do you communicate that in a way that it's going to come across as intentional and not self-serving, or not just kind of trying to quickly scan the room and get a comment out there.
Yeah, I would love to start first is, what is your currency in the conversation? What is your relevance to that conversation? Do you need to take a stance? Is a stance warranted? Is it related clearly to your purpose? I think first is pausing and understanding what currency you have in whatever the topic or challenge is. Before you kind of take a stance, just check your currency first as a company. What currency and relevance do you have to that issue?
I would build on that, and absolutely. And Mary, thank you for summarizing our first point. I mean, the question about can you claim profit and purpose is a really interesting one. I'm actually, in my role, surprised it's ever debated, because I think it is the only credible growth strategy. I think where organizations sometimes sort of struggle is where they fail to understand that true value that they create. And I think that's what Julian's talking about with currency. We talk about climate change, biodiversity loss, rising inequality, all huge megatrends that are impacting every organization in the world. 90% of the world's countries have net zero targets. That's influencing policy. 59% of that change needs to come from human and societal behavior change. So we know we need to communicate and engage with consumers in different ways, and they're ready to engage. And some brands sometimes get that wrong by not really understanding the role, not in the world that we live in today, but the role that they will play in that future society we have to create. And I think that's how you can really understand the true value. So when you're trying to communicate purpose, really do that forward thinking. What's the value that you create to society and the world? As Julian said, what is your currency? If you really understand that, and you really understand those material opportunities, you'll be able to position yourselves in the minds of consumers in a way that is so much more relevant, engaging, and to their lives, more relevant to their lives. And it will drive new spaces for growth as well for an organization. So I think that's the sweet spot in terms of purpose and profit. It's making yourself relevant.
I love that. And I think that kind of brings us into this idea of making the business case for purpose, right? So it's, we know it matters to consumers, increasingly so. We know that, there's hardly a business out there that could sacrifice one for the other, right? And so how do you, again, since we're all talking about communication here, how do you communicate that up and not just out, right? So how do you ensure that, a fund manager doesn't seem to miss the mark, right? Like, how do you share and really talk about that business case for purpose in a way that people will get it?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, it's like any good communication strategy. You have to tailor it to your audience. If you're talking to the CFO of your business, if you're talking to a fund manager, then you need to be more financial than the audience. So really having those statistics at your fingertips. So, for example, 50% of growth of consumer packaged goods in the last 5 years came from sustainable living products. There are loads of examples out there, but even in your own organization, you can talk about cost transformation in terms of reduction of energy. You can talk about talent attraction and retention. You can talk about brand and reputation, reach and impressions, brand equity. So there's a business case that you can state to that financial audience. But if you're talking to HR, you can have a completely different conversation, really related to the employee value proposition. So whether you're communicating internally or externally, just tailored to the audience. And when you're talking to consumers, I would say as well, is really break it down, because sustainability purpose can be very, very complicated. It's quite jargon heavy. I think that's probably set us back years in terms of the climate crisis, because people didn't really understand the proximity or what was important. So really breaking that down in terms of what it means to people today in their lives, again, being super relevant is really important. And speaking plain English, I think is always a top tip, I would say, in terms of communicating this agenda.
I would totally agree, Anna. translating, interpreting, and codifying your message to your audience is very important, and keeping it human, because at the end of the day, that fund manager is a person, that HR representative is a person, your employees are people, right? So interpreting your purpose that is relevant to them and what they are caring about and they desire to understand from a company is important. I know as communicators, we usually have, blanket messages and we do a little bit of I don't want to say we do a little bit of it, but we think about what's our angle for this audience or this audience. But we need to be really rigorous, but also, and this is the hard part, is be simple and clear in what we want our audiences to take away from whether it's evangelizing a purpose or understanding a company's stance on an issue, or understanding what part of a journey a company is on as it relates to sustainability, I&D, and what have you.
So it sounds like sometimes the right move is to kind of take a step back, think about the audience, think about what you're saying. And I think that's, I'm sure there are more than a few comms professionals out there that would say, well, we always want to do that, right? No matter what we're getting out there with in terms of message. But I do want to dig into this idea of, when is the right time to weigh in on and communicate purpose? And I think, again, we don't have to necessarily look at headlines specifically, but I will bring out mention of, in the wake of George Floyd's murder in 2020, there was this sense of urgency where brands and companies of all sizes were pushing out these statements, declaring their support for BLM, their support for the Black community. But as consumers pointed out, and are quick to point out, more than a handful of those statements were hollow, as in, they weren't backed up by what the company or the brand was actually doing, both internally and with respect to their employees, as well as externally with respect to consumers. So I think, this idea of, when do you weigh in, how do you weigh in, really is deserving of our attention now.
My view in these situations is one needs to respond quickly to the human impact with empathy. And in a crisis, so for example, the Ukraine situation, with humanitarian support if that's appropriate. But then I would really encourage organizations to take some time and pause and reflect before issuing any statements. And I think it is the role of communications in that moment to be really strategic and ask those difficult questions and hold the mirror up to the organization so that you're really, really clear on your position and can be truly authentic, because people don't tolerate inauthenticity anymore. You need to be really open and transparent about your flaws, and really authentic in your position. And any statement that you do make, make sure you follow through on that commitment as well, and you're really transparent in your progress, because we did see a lot of brands and organizations coming out with some very ambitious intent, and then get called out. So, that issue of being criticized if you're not authentic doesn't go away overnight. It's something that people come back and check 6 months, 12 months later to see whether or not you are really, really following through on those commitments.
Absolutely. And I would agree with the first point, Anna, that you made was around holding the mirror to your organization. First, before you're entering any conversation, check your currency. How is your company, addressing a certain, issue? How has your company, provided, listening outposts for talent and employees? How is your company establishing ways to track progress or programs or policies? And I think before entering a conversation, you got to be very strategic, to Anna's point. But first and foremost, I would say, is examine how you as an organization already show up around that stance. And look, I think we all grew up with Google access. It's ingrained in us to quickly and smartly and sharply Google a company's progress, a company's stance. And, before a brand or business enters that conversation, make sure you're as Google proof as possible, and make sure you're as transparent as possible. I also think there's something important to keep in mind is around this embrace of of it being a journey, right? These are not, quick fix problems that you can solve in a month or in a quarter. But embracing that there's no way to kind of get it completely right and pleasing every single stakeholder or shareholder. But I think coming from a place of authenticity, of transparency, and embracing the imperfect nature of taking a stance on an important topic or reality is key.
Yeah, and Mary, if I can just add to that and just build, I think also, do you think about what you already have in your arsenal? Because if you are authentic in your commitments, then you probably have programs and projects happening already within your business. So, tease out those examples and show where you've already been acting on this agenda. And that point about transparency, I was really proud. We have an incredible chief equity officer in the US, Christina Pyle, who worked with our corporate affairs team to make sure that 12 months after the George Floyd incidents, we published a detailed report around the demographics within our organization, the actions that we were taking. And I'm really proud that we've made amazing progress, but we also have areas where we need to do more. And we've been really, really honest and transparent about that. And I think, that including public publishing pay, for example. And I think that's really, really helped to bring people with us and helped our employees to understand the priorities and what we stand for at Dentsu.
I love that. And, based on what you both said, is that there's this need to, as you said, Julian, look inward, right? Hold the mirror and, and kind of get real, get honest. There's this phrase about, recognizing your flaws, right? But also recognizing your accomplishments and your achievements. And as you said, Anna, being confident in talking about those, right? If you are making progress as a company and you're doing so, again, with intention, I think we, can't say that term enough. It's good, it's a good thing to communicate that. But again, it's getting real and getting transparent, getting honest. And I think, as you said, Julian, a Google search can lend so much, right? So even if you think that, as a company that you don't necessarily need to, acknowledge maybe some of the gaps that you've had in the past, other people will point those gaps out to you and raise them to the surface. So even if you're not, in a position to be able to communicate about those, at least communicate about them internally, right? Start thinking about them and start understanding that, all it takes is one social media post for something to go viral these days, right? So just being proactively, I would say, thoughtful about these things.
And I would also say,
oh, go ahead, Anna.
I was just going to say, you have to be quite brave. Social media can be really complex because it does really pressurize organizations to be swept along with the crowd. So you really do have to hold your nerve if you're not ready to speak. And I mean, at Dentsu, sustainability officer, when I publish things on humanitarian issues, as you can imagine, people do that Google search. And I expressed empathy for the situation in Ukraine, particularly the women impacted by the situation in Ukraine, on LinkedIn. And, some of the posts that came back were questioning whether or not Dentsu was going to pull out of Russia. And in fact, we have. But at the time, we had to prioritize the needs of our people. We had a lot of people we had to evacuate from the Ukraine, and that was our absolute priority. So we had to hold our nerve and not rush to be part of that crowd. And I think on the purpose agenda, we do see that, and it never goes well. So, for example, net zero, lots of brands jumping on the bandwagon and claiming that, they're going to be net zero, they are net zero, or they have net zero targets. And they've subsequently been called out and held to account very, very publicly, because it's very easy to go online and check whether an organization does, in fact, have a science-based target or a net zero commitment. So again, be authentic, make sure you don't let the narrative take over action. And I think, again, that is the role of a strategic communications function. Again, ask the challenging questions and really hold the mirror up to the organization.
And I would just add to that is, as we're looking inward and pressure testing our own stances, our own policies, programs, communications, is that we have multiple perspectives represented in the room in that pressure testing, right? And having opportunities to challenge our own inner philosophies and approaches to a certain topic. It's really important to, when you're communicating to a spectrum of humanity, that needs to be represented within your own communications organization as well, right? So be very strategic, be very brave, and pressure test through having multiple perspectives represented in informing and shaping whatever stance or purpose message you want to put out there externally or internally.
Julian, we may need to repeat that phrase at the end, right? So, be brave, be strategic, pressure test. I love all of that. And Anna, you said it too, be brave, hold your nerve, right? So I think, there are global implications for all of these kind of big movements and moments that are happening. Anna, you mentioned Ukraine, but which is incredibly poignant right now, and our hearts and thoughts are with the Ukrainian people. I remember hearing pushback, not to go back 2 years in time again, but from leadership within global companies who considered BLM an American issue, right? And therefore not something that needed to or should even be communicated against in other markets. And, I remember hearing kind of these arguments play out in real time, both from, my peers and my colleagues, but also from headlines in various news sites. And, I remember, personally just thinking, all right, well, support for the Black community, that is a global initiative, right? So in the wake of broader shifts to embrace and proactively support D&I, that is a global matter. It's something that matters to the bigger community here, and not just, necessarily to the American market. So, and yet we know, in spite of everything that's going on, that it is very important to remain culturally sensitive to each market. So there are some nuances here, and it's, again, we don't have time enough to go through it all today, but I wonder if you can talk us through a bit of this. How do you kind of weigh that need to kind of think about the global implications of, in the global presence of a company versus the market presence, and how do you communicate against those?
I can speak to that from a perspective as a mixed Black queer person and communicator. I think one, race and ethnicity shows up very differently all throughout the world, right? And it comes with each kind of way it shows up, it comes with its own complex, nuanced history, right? And as communications leaders and professionals, we really need to embrace and read up and lean into educating ourselves about those nuances. And, in predominantly homogenized, areas of the world, whether that's North America, UK, Brazil, South Africa, race and ethnicity show up, similarly in the context of culture. But there's other parts of the world where race and discrimination is very high, but also culturally unacceptable to speak to. So, it's important as communicators to, and Anna, we touched on this in the earlier part, is to tailor and translate and code how we're speaking to X audience, no matter where they're at. But I would also urge us to lean into some universal human truths, right? Everyone, wants to be listened to. Everyone wants safety. Everyone wants, love, compassion, food on the table, a roof on their heads. There's universal themes and human truths that, unite humanity. And I would urge us as communicators to lean into those. I think those are our kind of, super levers that we can pull, when you're communicating with a lot of fragmented audiences. But I would just encourage everyone, listening in, is to just study up and lean into that complexity. Get familiar. Why is it okay to say colored in South Africa and not in the US, right? Like, understand that's a nuance that brings historical context to it. So that would be my initial thoughts.
I think that's beautifully said, actually. I think that's brilliant insight. And I really like the expression, the universal human truths, as well. I mean, the Sustainable Development Agenda, there are 17 goals for all mankind, because all of these are universal issues. They show up in different countries in different ways, in different cultures in different ways. And I think, you know, it is a challenge for people who are working with a global organization to have to consider that complexity. My organization operates in 145 countries, and, you know, our Chief Communications Officer, Danny Jordan, you know, really has to think about that in terms of how she communicates anything out into the organization. Different markets have different priorities. And when you look at materiality, when you're developing strategy, you can see, for example, racial equality will come out as a priority issue in the Americas. And it's human rights in Asia. In EMEA, it will be climate change. There will be different things that are priorities in different markets. But it doesn't mean that, for example, in the Americas, consumers don't care about climate change. You know, completely, you know, not the case at all. All of these issues are high priority. It's just that there are those cultural and geographical variations. So we really do need to think about that. And I think, you know, there are lots of approaches. You know, I don't think there's one size fits all communication to these types of issues. I think that's the reason why, you know, global organizations have regional and market-based communications teams. Developing core strategies and narratives that can be adapted to the cultural context is really important. And we need to respect that as well. We need to respect those cultural variations.
I agree. And I think, you know, modern communicators need to be culturally adept, right? To be culturally adept, we need to be surrounded by the spectrum of humanity. We need multiple perspectives that can challenge, that can pressure test, that can help us catch or, you know, lean into a nuance in a message that's important to capture, right? You know, there could be a nuance as simple as, do we capitalize the B in Black or do we keep it lowercase? What implications does that mean for that audience, right? So there's you know, having folks in the room, in the, you know, collaborative Google Doc as messages are being created, you know, we got to make sure that those audiences are represented and that are shaping those stances, that are you know, fueling and architecting how that communication shows up.
That is the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, because, you know, we have 45,000 people who are working for different organizations all over the world. We can't possibly do a good job for them and reflect the needs of the people to which they're communicating if our organization isn't representative of society. So I would say that's the lifeblood of any organization, making sure that you do bring those diverse perspectives in the room. And in doing so, you can really connect. I mean, one of my favorite adverts recently, it was a winner at Cannes last year, was Oreo's Proud Parent. And I don't know how many of you have seen it, but if you haven't watched it, please Google it. I'm sure it will make you cry. It makes me cry every time. But it's about a girl who's coming out and she brings her partner home and her father is struggling in the first instance. And the whole advert is really about explaining how children at that very challenging and difficult time in their life really need the support from their parents. And it's helped to open that dialogue. And as a mother of 4 children, that spoke to me in a way that, you know, similar adverts just, you know, haven't connected. It was so deeply emotional and really made me thoughtful. So I think that's the benefit of bringing those diverse perspectives in the room, because you can make content and communication so much more empathetic and relevant to the people you're trying to communicate with.
So I love that. Both Julian and Anna made a very strong call to action to strengthen your comms teams, right? Really try to you know, achieve some inclusivity and some diversity of thought, perspective, of background, and just make sure that you're prepared, right, to go out, you know, to kind of do the research. And as you said, Julian, to pressure test, right? Really be thoughtful about the messaging you're getting out there. So we had a question from the audience around essentially the consumer appetite for purpose. Right? Is it being overstated? Do we have any tests or have we tested it, right? So do we have any research? Do we have any data that suggests how consumers really feel, right? Because I know we've been told that, oh, well, consumers will boycott brands if they don't feel that the brand is leading with their same shared values. But, you know, Anna, Julian, do you have any research that you'd like to offer or suggest?
Loads. It's one of my favorite subjects, and I collect it. So I'll give some. There are some great examples out there. Kantar provides brilliant research. Edelman, the Trust Survey has got some brilliant data. Dentsu produced the Consumer Vision 2030, which talks about consumer attitudes. And if you go onto the Dentsu US site, you can see our Pulse Navigator, which is constantly surveying trends and perceptions from consumers on this agenda. If anybody is short for data points on the business case of sustainability, please email me personally. I will be delighted to share, because it's so important that we get people to understand that this does tick the box on every single corporate driver. It's something that I track on behalf of the exec at Dentsu, but really the business case is so strong, we really need to get any suggestion that it's not off the table.
And I would add Accenture and Accenture Interactive, we have a wealth of reports and research into consumer behavior, consumer motivations. I would recommend Googling Accenture Life Reimagined research, which really dives into those evolutions and what consumers expect from companies, right? And how do companies react and how do consumers respond to kind of purpose-driven communication. I would also recommend zooming out and checking out our annual Fjord Trends report, which really examines the major kind of the major cultural shifts that are changing the way people relate to brands, business, workplace, technology, each other, community, and how are those trends shaping this reality that's under construction right now. So there's a wealth of insights, and feel free to reach out to me. I'll direct you to where you got to go as well.
Great. So we have no shortage of research. Definitely reach out to both Anna, Julia, and myself, over LinkedIn or whatnot. But yeah, we will give you some light reading, some not so light reading, I suppose. So I just want to kind of go back and just pull out a couple of threads from what we talked about today, right? So we spoke about the need to lead with empathy, transparency, the need to listen, the need to be brave. Both of you have said that. Be strategic, right? Pressure test. Think about who's in the room as you're devising whatever message you're thinking about putting out there, whether it's on a global scale or on a regional scale. But more so just to get real and to get off, be authentic, lean into that. There's also this idea of the need to over communicate, right? So if we're doing all of the above, is there still that need to, when in doubt, speak up, right? Share. And I know we had a question from the audience as well that said, is it best, if you're not sure to go out with that message, is it best to kind of speak up and then refine later, or communicate throughout? What would be your recommendations therein?
My recommendation is, what is the desired outcome? What do you want to happen from communicating a stance or a perspective on a certain topic? So what do you want from it? That's what I would first ask myself as a communication leader, and I would pressure my business leaders. What's our desired outcome? Are we trying to enter a conversation to stand by our employees? Are we trying to enter a conversation to have some share of voice? Are we just understanding the why? And I would recommend, I know we live in a time where a news cycle lasts about 2 minutes. Pause, think about what you want to happen as a result of that communication. And I think over communication in this day and age is there's a lot of noise. So I would encourage making every touch point and having multiple touch points, but having it be meaningful and having it be, having a diversity of communications, touch points and strategies, so that, for example, on Accenture, we have our many kind of corporate goals, whether that's around gender equality, I&D, sustainability. We post our progress on our sites so people can always kind of look at those goals and understand where they're coming from, and just having having, tents for people to go into if they want to understand a certain stance or a certain understanding of programs or policies and progress, and making it meaningful, right? We don't want to just kind of create more noise and chatter. Make it as meaningful and valuable as it can.
And I would say from my side, I think there's probably three things. There is, just before I say that, I don't know how many people are familiar with the term green hushing, but there are some brands out there doing amazing work who've really pulled back from communicating lessons learned on this journey as a result of criticism they've received. We call it green hushing. And I think it's something we need to be very wary of. Unilever, for example, could have easily stepped back in the light of some of their criticisms, and thankfully they haven't, because actually we can all learn from each other's mistakes and all learn from each other's solutions as well. Which would lead me to the three things that I would probably say. One, communicate where you can show leadership and you can drive behavior change. Dentsu is one of the first companies in the world to have our net zero target approved. We've gone out loud and proud. We'll talk about that. It's really important that people have sight of that. The second thing is, communicate where you have solutions. Because there are organizations out there that might not have the resources you have, or might not have, those ideas. So, you can be really helpful in terms of crowdsourcing solutions. We really need to know there are times to compete, times to collaborate. As Wendy, our CEO, always says, this is a time to collaborate. So share where you have that. And the third thing is, don't be afraid to go out there if you don't have all the answers, because actually it is by communicating. You can ask, you can involve your employees, you can involve the media, you can involve consumers in creating those solutions. So don't be afraid to go out there and say we're 2/3 of the way there, but we actually need some help now, because I think people really want to lean in and co-create solutions together. And I know in the past I've collaborated with Accenture on looking at the business case for sustainability, really carving out that market opportunity that helps to drive policy and advocacy, so we can all come together on this agenda.
Love that. So some parting words here, right? Be brave. Don't be afraid to, as Anna said, if you don't have all of the answers right away, ask, right? Get out there, as Julian said, pressure test that messaging. See if it stands up internally before you go out with it externally. And of course, be thoughtful, be intentional, and be authentic. Stay true to the brand, stay true to who you are as a company. So thank you again for joining us today, wherever you are. And special thanks to our panelists for sharing. Oh, go ahead, Julian.
I just have one more thing to add to that. Yeah. Be your best case study, right? We're always having our clients and advising our clients. Be your own best case study. Show how this happens. How does your company communicate to your employees, to your shareholders, to your stakeholders? How is your company representing that full spectrum of humanity? How is your company, showing up in that, very interlinked, issues that we're all facing in this world today? So I would just say, be your own best case study as we help navigate through this wild time we're in.
Love that. Love that. That was a perfect interjection. I'm glad you shared it. So I know that both Anna and Julian have said, please do reach out to them if you have questions. If you want that research, they will be happy to share it your way. If you want to continue the conversation, please do so. Obviously we just had time enough today to kind of, weigh in on this very important matter, right? But it is evolving, and it's certainly, I would say, only going to increase in importance, right? So, again, much more to be said on this. I'm sure we'll revisit it at future events for Comms Club as well. But again, thank you both for being here today and for making this conversation what it was.